All right, our participant ticker is starting to slow down, so I think that is our sign that we are ready to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, Breaking Down Barriers to College Affordability, co-hosted by Ideas 42 and the Finance Authority of Maine, or FAME. My name is Amanda Kaplan, and I am an associate behavioral designer at Ideas 42, working on our post-secondary education and policy teams, and I am excited to be moderating our discussion today. We have folks joining us from both Ideas 42 and FAME to discuss how we can leverage behavioral science to break down barriers to college affordability, both in the state of Maine and across the United States. So let me get us started by first introducing our panel. First, we have Cassie Taylor, a principal behavioral designer at Ideas 42. Her current work focuses on applying and scaling behavioral insights in post-secondary education access and success. Prior to joining Ideas 42 6 years ago this week, Cassie managed the Behavioral Economics and Decision Research Policy Lab at Carnegie Mellon. She holds an AB in psychology from Princeton and an MS in education technology and applied learning science from Carnegie Mellon. Next, we have Catherine Flashen, a senior behavioral designer at Ideas 42, who focuses on education and global development projects and has over 10 years of experience in the field of behavioral science. Prior to joining Ideas 42, she worked for the Decision Lab, where she applied behavioral economics to the field of financial health. She holds a master's in behavioral marketing and consumer behavior from the Stanford School of Business. And finally, we have Martha Johnston, the Director of Education at the Finance Authority of Maine since September of 2014, but she also returned to the role, which she also held from 2007 to 2012. Her responsibilities at FAME include overseeing college access and financial education outreach, education finance programs and customer service, as well as Next Gen 529, Maine Section 529 plan, which we are going to be talking a lot about today. Martha has almost exclusively these last 33 years worked in higher education financing, including as a vice president for a national student loan lender and as a former director of financial aid institutions in Maine. And Martha is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College. So before we get started, just want to make a few notes of housekeeping. We're going to start today by hearing from Martha about the Finance Authority of Maine's barriers that they've encountered to folks accessing post-secondary education. We're then going to hear from Cassie and then Catherine, who will each talk about a specific behavioral barrier that Ideas 42 worked to investigate. And then afterwards, we're going to have some time for Q&A with all three panelists. Thanks to those of you who submitted questions ahead of time through the Eventbrite page when you registered. As our three panelists present, if you have any additional questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen to submit questions, and we will try to get to as many as we possibly can. Just to note that closed captioning is available for all participants, and this webinar is being recorded. A copy of the recording with any materials referenced and follow-up contact information will be provided to all of those who registered, whether or not they were able to make it to the event today. And finally, before I pass it off to Martha to kick us off, I just want to take a brief moment to answer a question that might be on some folks' mind, which is, what is Ideas 42? So Ideas 42 is a nonprofit organization that focuses on applying insights from behavioral science, the science that studies why people do what they do, to help improve social problems around the world. We were founded with the goal of ensuring that academic research from the intersection of psychology and economics and design were applied to real-world programs, policies, and products to help improve people's lives. Since our founding in 2008, we've grown into the largest applied behavioral science firm in the United States. We're guided by a large network of academic affiliates working at the forefront of behavioral science research and powered by a team of over 100 behavioral science practitioners working all over the world, which includes myself, Cassie, and Catherine. So specifically today, we're going to be talking about how we at Ideas 42 leverage behavioral science to help more people with the intention to pursue post-secondary education achieve that goal by breaking down barriers to college affordability that often stand in their way. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Martha to give us some insight into FAME and their work.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm so pleased with the number of people who are joining us for the webinar today, and I'm very excited to share with you all a bit about what the Finance Authority of Maine is. We actually are what we refer to as a quasi-independent state agency, and we work where economic development and workforce development come together. So we actually provide services to help Maine businesses financing, and then at the same time, we help Maine people afford education after high school. So college affordability, and that's where those two public missions come together. Unlike some of our peer agencies, you will often find that they are either higher education financing or their economic development. And we're really lucky because we are one agency and we do both of those things. And we recognize how tightly tied together they are. So in particular, the side of the house, if you will, that I work on, FAME Education, we focus on college affordability. And when we say college, we mean any education after high school. And listed below are just the big primary areas, but they really don't do justice to the extensiveness of what we do. We administer the Maine State Grant Program, which is the largest need-based grant program in the state of Maine. And that's approximately $27 million annually that we distribute to 14,000 students. But honestly, we administer well over a dozen additional state-based programs: loan repayment, loan forgiveness, tuition waivers. Additionally, we provide statewide support for FAFSA completion to students and families, and counseling about the financial aid process. And we work both with traditional and non-traditional students. This year, we had a very robust collaboration with the Maine Community College System as they rolled out free community college for students who graduated or adult education students who graduated in 2020, 21, 22, or 23. We administer the Next Gen 529 program. It's important to point out that actually our program is a national program. It's the 7th largest in the nation. And right now we have about $12.5 billion in assets under management. When we talk about Next Gen today and the project specifically related to Ideas 42, we're actually going to be talking about Maine accounts. And the definition of a Maine account for us is either the owner of the account or participant, or the beneficiary is a Maine resident. So that's really important to call out today. And then last but not least, this is very important to us and near and dear to our heart, but we are leading a statewide effort to support financial education at all stages of life, but with a focus on college affordability. We feel very strongly that financial education, financial capability is a very powerful lever that people can pull as it relates to college affordability. So in 22-23, we were so fortunate to work with Ideas 42. We ran a formal RFP and we identified our work around how we can help more Maine people afford education after high school, specifically looking at intentions and aspirations, personal savings, and then how to access other financial resources, all of those things leading up to college affordability. So what that boiled down to were 3 work streams. The way we wrote our RFP, we identified 3 big problems, if you will, that we wanted to solve. And we were so thrilled with the way we worked with Ideas 42. So intentions and aspirations was really, how do we increase engagement with FAME's communications and our programming? We've always felt very strongly, once we got somebody in front of us, if they understood the message we had to share, we could really get to them. We could help make college affordability resonate with them in a way that they might not have thought was possible. Then we also wanted to talk about how do we get more people to engage with our 529 program? And then how do we help more people file the FAFSA? Our project focused on all 3 items, but today we're actually going to talk about number 2 and number 3. So how we worked with Ideas 42 related to college savings and how we worked with them related to FAFSA completion. And just real quickly, to give you a little sense of where we were at the time that we approached Ideas 42, our current marketing approach to help people open accounts and make ongoing contributions to our 529 program, we do use a social marketing firm, very different than working with a behavioral science firm. Our approach has always been data and research driven with targeted messaging, and we provide savings incentives for account opening and contributions. But of course, the pandemic hit. And so what we saw was a change in the economic landscape impacting our families and their ability to save for education after high school. So it was fortuitous timing, if you will, that we were able to engage with Ideas 42 when we did. As it relates to FAFSA completion, we definitely needed to make up for lost ground during the pandemic and improve our baseline. And FAFSA completions in general, we were always hitting about 60%, but there were 40% of Maine students who graduated from high school who weren't going on to education after high school. They weren't going into the military, they weren't going into apprenticeships. And so we really wanted to target that 40%. Now I will put a little caveat, since this slide was created, we have rebounded incredibly with FAFSA completions this year, and that is related to our Free Community College collaboration, because in order for students to access Free Community College, they did actually have to complete the FAFSA first. But that doesn't take away from the fact that we still have 40% of Maine high school students we want to reach, and of course, all of our non-traditional students. And doing that in an environment that was exacerbated during the pandemic about the shift in the value of education after high school. So those are really the context, if you will, of what we were dealing with. And I will turn this over to Cassie.
Thank you so much, Martha. So I'm going to go a bit deeper into the work that she just mentioned about how we took a behavioral perspective to help people reach their college savings goals. But first, for those who are a little less familiar, what is a 529 account? 529 accounts are tax-advantaged vehicles for college savings, and they're designed to support families across all socioeconomic populations, but they're especially critical for middle-income families where financial aid won't fully cover college costs. And for families who start saving early, even small annual contributions can add up to a really meaningful amount by the time a student is considering options for a higher education. And many states offer their own 529 plans, but people can choose to participate in any state plan. There just might be certain benefits available only to state residents. And Maine's 529 plan is called Next Gen 529. And like Martha said, it's administered by FAME. And we were looking at ways to help more Maine residents engage with this Next Gen 529 program. And more specifically, we aim to help more people who already had 529 accounts contribute to those accounts. So I want to clarify a couple points here. We decided to focus on existing account owners who likely already had some intention to save, but weren't doing so in the ways that they might want. And we also focused on people with median household incomes. Compared to lower income families, these families are both more likely to have some financial slack to consider saving, and also less likely for college costs to be covered by financial aid. And last, we aim to get more people to contribute at least $1,000 each year so that they could take full advantage of Maine's Next Step Matching Grant, which matches 30% of the first 1,000 contributed annually. So one hallmark of our work across projects is that we always start by really carefully defining what we're working towards so that we have a concrete, measurable behavioral outcome. And this is how we defined our focus here. Once we have that defined, then we learn what might be getting in the way of that outcome. And through structured interviews with account owners and in-depth analysis of administrative data, we identified 6 key insights about why people might not contribute as much to their 529 accounts as they would like. And these insights spanned the contribution process. Some explained why people might not choose to save in a 529 plan or choose a lower amount than they might prefer, while others mattered more for helping people make it through the contribution process itself. And of course, these behavioral insights are all in addition to the structural barriers you're familiar with: financial constraints, inequitable access to banking, rising college costs, and more. And our goal here is to add to that conversation with a behavioral perspective. So we don't have time to discuss all of them today, but I do want to briefly present these 3 insights. And I'd like to ask you to think if they resonate in your context, because then you can think about how to change your context to remove those barriers. At Ideas 42, the core of what we do is looking at how our innate psychology interacts with the world around us and how that interaction can influence us to make certain decisions or behave in certain ways. And if we want to end up with a different outcome with people behaving in a different way, we need to change one of those 2 things. It's no surprise that we can't change what's in people's heads, but we can change the context they operate in. I want to note that there's no such thing as a context that doesn't influence our behavior in some way. So it's up to us as program designers to be really thoughtful about the context we're creating. All right, with all that out of the way, let's dive in. First, we found that when people thought about how much they could afford to save and set aside, they first considered everything else in their budgets. And this makes sense when we consider the psychology of present bias, or the tendency to prioritize short-term goals over longer-term rewards, and especially how that can be exacerbated under conditions of scarcity or constrained resources, like a tight budget. We see that account owners are likely to prioritize immediate needs over longer-term saving goals, especially since those bills tend to be much more salient and noteworthy. And this is a completely reasonable decision to make. But when people delay saving until they feel more financially stable, that day might be continuously put off. And people can miss opportunities to set aside manageable yet meaningful amounts in the meantime. We can mitigate this challenge by creating slack in families' budgets and creating some more space there, and also by helping people notice those moments and have those moments be opportunities to consider redirecting any available funds to their 529 accounts. Next, we found that many account owners who know they want to contribute simply forget to do so, potentially missing out on matching grants, tax deductions, or other program-specific benefits. We all have finite limits on our attention, and between work responsibilities, childcare duties, and everything in between, it can be really easy to forget about tasks that don't occur regularly, like saving. People often will wait to the end of the year to contribute to long-term savings accounts, since that allows them to have a better sense of other expenses first. But waiting creates an opportunity for people to forget to contribute altogether. And behavioral science emphasizes the importance of sending timely reminders at moments when people are both motivated to engage and also positioned to take immediate action. Because the longer people delay action, the more likely they are to forget. The third insight I want to share with you all today is that even once someone has decided to contribute and is poised to do so, process challenges can knock them off track. Account owners need to coordinate between multiple financial institutions, navigate complex jargon, and overcome issues with technology to both set up their accounts and make or adjust contributions. And when they want to ask for help with those issues, they need to figure out who they should contact. Is it their state program administrator, the account service provider, their bank, or someone else, and how to get in touch? Behavioral science shows us that small hassles like these can have an outsized impact on follow-through. And while some people might be able to jump through these hoops and succeed, others will likely fall off track. And we know that these hassles will disproportionately impede people with the fewest resources to manage them. So whenever possible, we'd advise you to try and simplify both your processes and communications. Make it as easy as you can for people who want to contribute to actually do so. All right, before I pass it over to Catherine to talk about FAFSA filing, which can help close the remaining gap for college affordability after families have saved what they can, I want to mention one resource we have on our website. This design guide summarizes all of these insights and more, along with some actionable recommendations for how you can facilitate contribution as a program administrator. For example, one insight I didn't get to today was about normalization and visibility of asking for support from friends and family. And the design guide shares 3 concrete ideas about how you can address that insight with behavioral design.
Thanks, Cassie. So as Amanda said before, I'm Catherine, and I will be presenting our work with FAME on how we took a behavioral perspective to help more people file the FAFSA. But first, I just want to quickly review a few high-level details about the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, just so we're all on the same page and know what I'm talking about. So the FAFSA is an important resource for students to finance their post-secondary education, as filing the FAFSA can unlock significant amounts of federal aid, both through federal grants and loans. However, despite these benefits, nearly $4 billion in Pell Grants, the most common type of federal grant, went unclaimed in 2021 because students didn't submit the FAFSA. The majority of Pell Grants are awarded to students from families making less than $60,000 per year, which describes about half of the families in Maine. The median household income is right around $63,000. Finally, I also want to note that filing the FAFSA is often a prerequisite for accessing other important forms of financial aid. So Martha mentioned this in the beginning, but the state of Maine has guaranteed tuition-free community college for all students who graduate high school between 2020 and 2023, as well as adult students she mentioned, but they first need to file the FAFSA in order to get access to this aid. As Cassie mentioned previously, we always start a project by defining what we're working towards so that we have a concrete, measurable behavioral outcome. And this is how we defined our focus for this work. Specifically, we focused on increasing FAFSA filing rates for high school seniors in Maine, and particularly those from low-income households. We focused on this population for this work because the bulk of federal grant money is awarded to these students, so they have the most to gain from filing the FAFSA. And so that alongside with our 529 work, we would be thinking about how to make college more affordable for students from both low and middle income households. And why the language as early as possible? Well, aid is often awarded on a first come, first served basis. So we want students to file the FAFSA before important filing deadlines set by colleges or by the state. We then set out to identify what behavioral barriers might be preventing students from filing the FAFSA. Through in-depth interviews with high school counselors, FAME staff, and students, as well as a review of the existing literature, we identified 4 key insights. 2 of these barriers may prevent students from setting the intention to file in the first place, from even thinking that filing the FAFSA is something that they should do or something that's on their radar. Importantly, even when students have decided to file the FAFSA, other things may throw them off track and prevent them from actually following through on this intention. The other 2 barriers we identified fall into this category. I'm going to start sounding like a broken record here. Unfortunately, we don't have time to discuss all of the barriers we identified today, but I do want to talk about these 3 barriers in a bit more detail. First, we found that students might wait to file the FAFSA until they've decided whether and where they want to pursue post-secondary education, which can lead them to miss important filing deadlines. Specifically, we found that students often had the mental model or kind of framework in their minds of first, I need to figure out if I want to pursue post-secondary education at all, and then I'll figure everything out, I'll figure out the rest, including FAFSA later. Because students have a lot going on their senior year, it can be easy to procrastinate or just put off making this decision, which also happens to be a pretty big one. And we all know that sometimes those are the easiest to just put off. We know from behavioral science research that deadlines can help prompt action, but filing deadlines vary by institution. And this ambiguity can exacerbate procrastination and lead students to put off filing the FAFSA until it's too late. One way to address this challenge is to incorporate information about FAFSA into moments when you have a wide audience's attention, such as during events for all high school seniors and their families, or during the last 5 minutes of an English class, so that this information isn't only reaching students who already know that they want to go to college, and so that you prompt all students to begin thinking about their post-secondary plans earlier. A second way is to try to reframe filing as step number 1, or the first step in helping a student figuring out a post-high school plan or path that's right for them. Second, we learned that students may not see the FAFSA as a meaningful gateway to affording post-secondary education. In other words, students may overweight the cost of college, underweight the actual aid they're likely to receive, or assume that financial aid packages themselves are too risky to accept. It's more common to hear in the news stories about college graduates carrying huge debt burdens than it is about those who received grants or were eligible for work-study programs. And President Biden's cancellation of student debt for some borrowers has exacerbated this imbalance. From behavioral science, we know that the availability of information or how easily it comes to mind can influence our decision-making. We also know that financial scarcity can reduce our cognitive bandwidth and deplete our mental energy, causing us to focus more on the short term than on the long term. Students from low-income households may be particularly worried about taking on student debt or missing out on the opportunity to make money right away in the workforce and focus less on the long-term benefits that a post-secondary degree can provide. We can mitigate this challenge by debunking common myths about the FAFSA, as well as making it easier for students to understand the actual costs, funding opportunities, and potential return on investment of various post-secondary pathways. Finally, students may struggle to receive the help that they need to file the FAFSA from their caregivers, who in turn may not know about or fail to utilize opportunities for support offered by FAME or by others, such as by high schools. Behavioral science tells us that social norms can have a powerful influence on behavior, leading people to behave in ways that are common among their peers. In communities with low historical rates of college attendance, caregivers may not realize how important their role is in the filing process, or that they're capable of helping their children submit the FAFSA. Filing support offered by FAME and by high schools more easily reaches students than caregivers, which can lead students to feel like they need to be the intermediary between the support and their families. In order to combat this barrier, it's important to normalize common questions asked by non-traditional students and their families about the FAFSA, as well as to increase accessibility of information about the FAFSA and filing support for caregivers. And with that, I'll pass things back over to Amanda to wrap things up and get us started with our Q&A.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you to all of our speakers, Cassie and Martha as well. Before we transition to our Q&A, I just want to take a brief moment to summarize what we've heard so far and connect some of the dots between the two work streams we heard about from Cassie and Catherine, and connect them back to the overall goals that Martha laid out from FAME's perspective. So we heard that FAME's goal is tackling barriers to college affordability, and that two key ways we can do that is increasing 529 contributions and increasing FAFSA submissions. So we heard from Cassie about how Ideas 42 leveraged a behavioral approach to first identify 6 behavioral insights or reasons why account owners might not be contributing to their next-gen 529 account. Then Ideas 42 developed 42 design solutions that come directly from those insights and are designed to mitigate them in order to increase 529 contribution behavior. And then similarly, we heard from Catherine about how Ideas 42 once again took a behavioral approach, identified 4 behavioral insights or reasons as to why seniors in high school might not be submitting the FAFSA, and then how we developed 19 design solutions, once again, designed directly to mitigate those barriers and promote the behavior that we're aiming to promote. So I want to take a moment first to just reinforce something that Cassie mentioned, which is how these two streams of work are both distinct, but then also reinforce one another towards our common goal. So for our 529 work, we of course want as many families as possible to be saving as much as they can when they can. But we recognize that this tool specifically is really helpful for middle income families and plugging those gaps between what families might be able to afford on their own and what financial aid may provide to them. So getting these families to save early and regularly can be a really key behavior for them in accessing and affording post-secondary education. And then in our FAFSA work, again, we want everyone to file the FAFSA, as many people as possible, but we recognize that this behavior is especially critical for families with low incomes who are likely to qualify for large amounts of financial aid. These two behaviors together allow us to cover a broad swath of the population in the state of Maine, both low and moderate income households, while also ensuring that we take this approach and recognize that not every behavior is right for every single person or family. At the end of the day, what we want to do is provide and make it as easy as possible for families to follow through on their intentions, to pursue and access post-secondary education when that intention exists, and to provide various tools, 529 savings, FAFSA filings, direct support, engagement, like Martha mentioned, in order to allow families to break down those barriers and afford post-secondary education. So with that framework, I'm going to transition us now to our Q&A. I'm going to ask all 3 of our panelists to join me. And we're gonna start, I think, with Martha, from your perspective at the Finance Authority of Maine. And I'm curious if we can just take kind of a broader perspective about applying behavioral science to FAME's work, and wondering if you can just share with others, especially folks who might be joining us from other states or other programs who might be interested in applying this approach to their own work. And yeah, Catherine, I think you can stop sharing your screen for this, and we can just all have a conversation as well.
Great. I'll jump in while Catherine's turning off her screen share. So First, I want to just call out the fact that the behavioral science framework provided something that was incredibly clear and compelling and very accessible for those of us who aren't behavioral scientists. So I think it really helped give us a framework for looking at our populations and our data in a way that we hadn't looked at it before. We're always looking at the data, we're always using it to inform, but I think using the behavioral science lens actually helped us become more intentional with our own work. And the way that the projects were structured, really, it was quite amazing. When I think about the fact that we had our goals very clearly articulated, what we wanted to do to get families to engage, for instance, with 529, and how each time we created an idea that it addressed a certain barrier or behavioral insight, but then it also connected directly to one of 4 goals. And so those goals being raise awareness, build intention, shaping the goal of the family to save, so different use of the word goal there, and then also facilitating contributions. And then the same thing was applied with FAFSA, right? So we use the behavior, we make the connection between the idea, the barrier that's being addressed, and then the goal, which is combating misperceptions, providing information, creating opportunities to file the FAFSA, and then offering support and helping students understand that there's support available. So I think that part of it was really amazing and provided clarity of concept and clarity of execution. And that's the stage we're at now, is sorting through all the ideas and what we will do next. But that was the biggest takeaway, was really understanding the psychologies behind it. Nobody on my staff is a psychology major, I don't think. I was not. But it was really helpful to understand what's happening in the background when somebody is encountering a barrier, or what's something that's stopping them from taking a behavior that would otherwise be good for them.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, and I want to dive a little deeper into those ideas that the Finance Authority of Maine is now toggling through. We heard both from Cassie and Catherine about the specific insights and then some broader design tips. But I want to dig a little deeper into what a specific design recommendation actually looks like in practice. And then maybe talk to you, Martha, about what FAME is doing in terms of thinking about that and maybe implementing. So Catherine, I'll start with you, and we can start with our FAFSA stream of work. So I'm wondering if you can give an example of a design idea or two that came directly out of those FAFSA behavioral insights that you mentioned. And then I will ask you, Martha, if you can talk about how FAME is thinking about those ideas in terms of next steps and implementation. But I'll start with you, Catherine, first.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to share two that we presented to FAME. One is what we ended up calling senior nights, which was kind of a low lift reframing tweak idea related to FAME already offers these wonderful information sessions that are held at high schools in order to tell high school seniors about the FAFSA. But we suggested kind of reframing them as senior nights in order to attract a wider audience. So to make sure that students and caregivers who might still be unsure about post-secondary education or whether they're going to pursue it, to actually attend those events. So in other words, presenting on post-secondary education and the FAFSA during a school event that outlines other important information for seniors and their caregivers, so that the people going to those events aren't just the people who are thinking like, yep, college is right for me. It'll attract a wider range of students and families. And this gets at the design tip, kind of utilize opportunities attended by a wide audience that I shared, and also tries to think about also how to create more of those moments to talk to a wider audience. The other one that I wanted to talk about is more of a kind of higher lift, higher effort idea, but we called it student ambassadors. And so the idea here was to train recent high school graduates as student ambassadors to serve as peer mentors for high school seniors. So normalizing kind of various pathways to post-secondary education and share their experiences with the FAFSA. And the idea here was to kind of help get FAFSA on students' radars, set the intention to file for students who might not be thinking about this otherwise, and help provide support. So again, to create kind of this peer mentorship model and make sure that student ambassadors are kind of represent a wide variety of pathways to post-secondary education. And I'll pass it off to Martha to talk about how they're thinking about taking those ideas forward.
Yeah, so the senior night, so the first thing we did was, well, what we are doing across the board with all of our ideas, I can't do my quick math, but our 42 and our 19 ideas, is to loop in our own marketing team. So we have a marketing team at FAME, and then we have the social marketing firm that we actually work with. So the first step for us is to bring everyone back to the table, understand all the insights, the design guides, everything. So that's all been wonderful. For senior nights, we've already jumped in with, okay, how do we rename what we currently do? We call them financial aid nights, or we call them FAFSA completion events. So the college access team, and that is a team of 5 folks located regionally throughout the state, have jumped in and have starting to do that work and to bring in our marketing firm and our in-house marketing team. The other thing that we're doing, and it's always been very successful for us, we're looking for schools where we have highly engaged school counselors, so that we can examine whether or not there's something that already is happening at the school that we can leverage in a way that we hadn't before. So maybe they do already have something like a senior night, but they never featured financial aid or featured FAFSA. So those are things that we're looking at, and we're really excited about that. Student ambassadors, that's actually really exciting as well, because we feel like that has spun off 3 opportunities from one thing that feels like a heavy lift, but I don't know if I don't know. We're very excited. So I'll just say that the 3 scenarios are these. We think that a senior, an early adopter, someone who does the FAFSA in the fall, could actually come back as an ambassador in the spring to their own peers. So my colleague, Mila Tappan, our college access manager, we call that the tripling effect, right? So bring 2 friends to a January event and we'll get them to do what they were doing. So early adopter, student ambassador. We can also use student ambassadors, we think seniors from the fall and spring, to talk to the juniors in the spring before they become seniors. So we think that's another great opportunity, and they're still there at the school. And then I think the opportunity that probably does represent like the heaviest lift is if we try to get students who graduated to come back and to talk to seniors in the fall. But there's still those really 3 great, wonderful opportunities. So we're looking for schools, again, very engaged school counselors who are willing to pilot an opportunity like that with us to work on student ambassadors. We're already talking about how do we create incentives to build that team of student ambassadors. Do we offer scholarships? Do we offer gas cards? Something to the students to thank them for their time and effort. Do they get community service hours? Whatever that might look like. So we're really excited about all of the ideas, but those are the 2 that we've latched onto right away and that we're already starting to work through the process for FY24.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Catherine. I think talking about the design ideas is very illustrative of what this process looks like once you get really concrete and you get to the application phase. So Cassie, I'm going to ask you the same question with 529 so we can demonstrate. Wondering if you can provide an example of a design idea or 2 that comes directly from the behavioral insights you talked about. And then Martha, again, we will pass it back to you to talk about how FAME is thinking about these things in terms of implementation.
Sure. So sort of a whole cluster of ideas related to 529 contributions was around publicizing gift contributions. So this could be a public-facing social media template or a fundraising page like a GoFundMe page that allows friends and families to more easily share when they're contributing to someone else's 529 account. We know it's really common to give a gift, and there's a lot of templates or sort of processes set up to easily accommodate that sort of action for you to donate to your niece's 529 account on her birthday, for example. But we also know that the social norm of contributing to 529 accounts can only be powerful if it's visible. And oftentimes those gift contributions aren't visible, so they can't influence other people's behavior and help normalize that action. So we were thinking about different ways to make social media filters, saying that For example, modeled after the ones that say people have voted or donated to a certain cause, you could have that for 529 contributions. Or these ideas could also be physical, like a bumper sticker or a pin. The point is to just make it a little bit more visible, put it into people's daily lives, and help make that social norm a little bit more salient.
So I'll start the same way I did last time. Our first step obviously has been to loop in our FAME marketing team as well as our external marketing agency. But we really did latch on to the publicized gift ideas, and we've started very similarly. I feel like one big idea has spun off 4 really neat opportunities that we're looking at. One is to leverage existing opportunities or leverage existing partnerships that already exist. So we do have a gifting platform that we use. We also have a rewards platform. So is there a way that we can take that social media template, if you will, to help people publicize when they contributed to somebody else's 529 account? So those are things that we're looking at right now. We also have on our website the ability to talk more about providing a gift in the form of 529, but also a time capsule that you might be creating for a little person who's got a 529. So could we turn that into a testimonial opportunity where people record themselves and talk about how much fun they had creating that opportunity and put that into our social media? We love the bumper sticker idea, but shout out to my college savings program manager. She wants a t-shirt too, and we wanted to say, I support a next gen kid. So we're talking about how we can do something like that. That might be really fun. And then last but not least, again, this is 4 ideas I think that spun off of one, but last but not least, creating savings challenges. So kind of like a pay it forward. So if you make a gift into a 529, you get entered into a sweepstakes. So we really think that there's a great opportunity through the publicize a gift, but then also creating a community of savers, which I think is really important to the state of Maine generally.
Awesome. Thanks, Martha. I actually want to ask one question that was put in our chat, which I think is really interesting, both in the context of what we did here, but also generally in terms of understanding what it means to take a behavioral approach and how we actually uncover these behavioral insights through a rigorous design methodology. So maybe I'll ask you, Cassie, first, but Catherine and Martha, please feel free to jump in if you have thoughts. But our question was if we could share a little bit more about our in-depth interview process. Maybe I'll ask you to talk first about what is the theory of change? Why do we do interviews in the first place? And then maybe specifically in the context of our work with FAME, what did this look like for Mainers? Were there any challenges that we encountered? And if so, how did we overcome those?
Yeah, thanks, Ross, for this question. It's a really good one. So when we do interviews, specifically when trying to uncover these behavioral insights, the way we approach it is first by generating hypotheses about what might be driving the problem. So we'll look really deeply about the context by going through the process ourselves, looking at similar literature, talking to people at FAME who are very familiar with that contribution process for 529 in particular, and using that process to identify likely issues. But then we don't want to stop with our assumptions about what's driving the problem. We want to validate those assumptions through direct research. So for that, it might be surveys, interviews, focus groups, whatever we're going to use to try and figure out what of our hypotheses are actually valid and which aren't. And starting with that research allows us to make sure that when we get to develop designs that mitigate the barriers, we're making sure to use our time and our energy effectively and actually targeting the real issues. So for 529 in particular, what we did was try and get in touch with existing account owners who weren't contributing to their account or not hitting that $1,000 a year goal. So what we did was use FAME's connections to reach out to account owners who met that criteria and then set up interviews, develop an interview guide that directly targeted those assumptions and those questions that we had, and follow through with those interviews. One challenge, as you can imagine, is it's often difficult to get people who aren't engaging in the way that you'd like to reach out and tell you why not. Often this happens across instances. People who aren't engaging with an account are also the least likely to respond to that sort of an interview request, even if it is compensated, which we do in all of our work, especially for equity considerations. So what we did here was try and fill that gap by talking to people who, even if they're contributing some, aren't contributing maybe as much as they used to or as much as they'd like. People's contribution behaviors change year to year, and a lot of people have had accounts open for many years. So even if someone's able to contribute now, they might still be able to speak historically to what were the barriers to them contributing in the past. So we're trying to do that to fill the gaps. And then when we get to the designs, we're going to go back and user test the designs and certainly want to pilot them to determine if they're as effective as we'd hoped. And all of those are future checkpoints against any sort of mistakes or over assumptions we might have made earlier in the process. I'll leave it open for Catherine and Martha in case they wanted to add anything generally or about FAFSA in particular.
I can just,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead,
Go ahead.
Martha.
Well, I might say just for FAFSA, it was probably particularly challenging because we don't know who didn't file the FAFSA because they didn't file the FAFSA. So, you know, as far as being a state agency that actually receives the FAFSA data, that was challenging in particular. So we were very creative in how we could do that. And again, we really did rely on our school counselor partners to be interview subjects themselves or to help us identify students. So that was a really creative and I think successful way to get at what otherwise looked like a conundrum in the beginning.
Yep. And I just want to add to that, that actually someone else that was really helpful for us to work with in order to connect to students were career and technical education centers. So originally we were kind of going down the counselor path in terms of trying to get counselors to connect us with students, which was sometimes difficult because students might not be in touch with them after graduating. And we were looking at students who were over 18 and trying to talk to students who might not have filed the FAFSA or might have filed it after kind of the priority deadline or deadline set by the state. And actually career and technical education centers, it often seems, are more in touch with those students than counselors might be. So that was kind of a challenge for us that then we found a kind of stumbled upon a way to overcome. But just if anyone else is looking to get in touch with students, that might be a good path to go down.
Awesome. Yes, and I want to circle back to something else that Cassie mentioned back in her original presentation about how we as behavioral scientists use the context to understand human behavior. And I think we've touched on a bunch of different aspects of the context in the post-secondary education space that are important. For example, in Maine, the idea that certain folks might qualify for free community college, or Biden's potential student debt cancellation plan that's circulating. One of the other things that I do not want to forget to mention and make sure that we talk about its impact is the fact that the FAFSA itself and the entire financial aid process right now at a federal level is undergoing serious changes in response to a law that was passed by Congress. Currently, as we speak, the Department of Education is overhauling their financial aid process. This includes simplifying the FAFSA to try to make it easier for folks to file it, and also changing the way in which aid is actually calculated for families. So Catherine, this is a question for you first, and then Martha, also feel free to jump in. If you can talk about how, if at all, these kind of broader contextual changes affected the nature of the work that you did, and then maybe how you see these behavioral insights and the designs that came out of them applying once this new process is implemented in what we are expecting of December of this year.
Thanks, Amanda. So I would say it wasn't a central part of our diagnosis and design work just because we don't exactly know what this is going to look like. I mean, we have some ideas of what's changing, but I would say that I think that all the behavioral insights we identified and all the designs we presented to FAME will still be relevant after these changes that are made. And that's because we had this in the back of our minds as we were doing this work, and we didn't want to give any final designs to FAME that we thought wouldn't be relevant after these changes are rolled out. One thing I want to mention is that what I think the FAFSA Simplification Act is really trying to do, which and was one of the behavioral insights I didn't talk about relevant to FAFSA today, is this hassles piece. So Cassie really talked about that related to 529, but it's basically the idea that just the more hoops you add, the harder it is for people to jump through all those hoops and basically go from the start of a process to the end of it. So basically what I think the FAFSA Simplification Act is trying to do is simplify the process. And so if 100% of, or for all the families who start the filing process, basically 100% of those families should finish. So that's great. But I think anytime we make changes, we need to think about like actually how users are going to interact with them. And the more you can kind of sit down and watch your users interact with the process or talk to them about kind of how they're thinking about something that you'd like to implement, the better. And one example I want to present is like, I know one change that is going to happen is that many people won't have to provide their income information anymore because there's going to be a direct data exchange between the Department of Education and the IRS. But we can think about, we did see in interviews that people were often unsure or worried about providing their income information or how this was being used. So I think one area that's really ripe for behavioral science in kind of the FAFSA simplification is thinking about like how the FAFSA asks for permission to pull from the IRS, like how this is designed, how this is messaged. And so I think that's just something I'm thinking about going forward as well.
Yeah, so I think actually all of the work that we've done becomes even more important related to FAFSA simplification, because I think, as Catherine has mentioned, we know what the goals are for simplification, but we also know that sometimes there can be some unintended consequences, especially since a lot of the effort is around increased security. And so we're anticipating as a staff that we are going to see challenges with students doing one part of the FAFSA and parents doing the other, so a roles-based process. So yes, there's probably going to be some bumps these first couple years with the new process as it rolls out, but I think the behavioral science work becomes even more critical because of that, especially when it comes to the hassle factor or it's just hard, right? So how do we work together using those behavioral insights to make sure we're designing something that helps people through what is otherwise kind of like just a structural problem, if you will. So we're definitely anticipating that, but I think we're very, very grateful. I know we're very grateful to have had this work in our back pocket now and ready to use, not just for this year, but for when FAFSA simplification launches.
Awesome. And I think that is a perfect segue to our final question, which is thinking about there are a lot of changes that are happening in the world that are not just applying to the state of Maine, but across the United States. And I would venture to say that other people in other programs and schools and districts are probably dealing with similar problems and might benefit from some sort of behavioral science informed advice or insights that you all could share. So curious in our last few minutes, if each of you could think about maybe one key insight or takeaway from this work that you think is likely to apply in other contexts, other FAFSA programs or 529 plans, or just schools generally. And Martha, I'm going to ask you to go last because I have kind of a corollary to this question for you specifically. So maybe Cassie, I will start with you.
Sure. I think one of the biggest takeaways about using a behavioral perspective is just how important it is to put yourself in the shoes and in the sort of like perspective of your end user. And so flip it around, and instead of thinking about all of the programming you want to be developing, or maybe it's worked elsewhere, or you see a new tool or a new option, really looking at what they're experiencing and what challenges they might be encountering, and then addressing those barriers. When we work with colleges, we will often hear college administrators say things like speaking student, whereas we were speaking college before, but now we can speak student. And it really can be two different languages, because what we as program administrators often think to be the case and how simple it is or easy it is isn't always how it's going to feel for the student or the person saving or whoever your end user is. So trying to flip it around, put yourself in their shoes, take that perspective, that's going to get you pretty far of the way to developing these sorts of insights and design recommendations, even if you aren't adding the specific behavioral science behind it.
Go ahead, Cass.
I'll just jump on that theme and what I was talking about with kind of hassles and FAFSA simplification. So hassles are important. Don't underestimate the power of simplification. If there are too many hoops, people will stop jumping at some point. So for FAFSA specifically, we saw that students may encounter various challenges like navigating confusing questions or having to gather financial information from their caregivers, or resolving errors that were part of kind of completing the process. But you can really think about applying this to like any work you do. I think it's like the most easy and actionable thing to take away from behavioral science in general. So like walk through your program or process yourself, have a friend walk through it. Watch one or two of your end users walk through it, and where are they getting tripped up? Like where are they getting stuck? And then think about how you can address those kind of pain points.
Great. And Martha, I will ask you to talk about what would you like other people to know, but then also where are you and FAME headed next, kind of like a vision into the future where you're headed.
Sure. So I guess what I want other stakeholders or agencies similar to FAME, I want them to know they can do it. They can do this work with behavioral science. And I think it's very tempting for any and all of us to be like, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time to invest in this other special project. But I think probably it's the best investment that we could have made as FAME Education, tackling this work with Ideas 42. And as I mentioned, I think it's helped create a framework, and it's helped us, by virtue of that framework, be very, very intentional in everything that we do related to these two big goals. The other thing I would say, as far as you can apply this work across other aspects of what you're doing. I mean, we didn't talk about this today, but the communications audit that Ideas 42 did on our publications was something last summer. That was how we addressed one of our big nebulous questions, was really helpful, incredibly useful. And we started using that work right away. So I think that it can sound bigger than it has to be, but it's so powerful. And so I just don't think people should be scared off by approaching their work with a behavioral science lens. So I think that we don't have any regrets at FAME about pursuing that. And then we did engage with Ideas 42 only on the first 3 aspects of your formula, so to speak. So, we will certainly look to the future as we, execute, scale, and evaluate what we do to work with Ideas 42 in the future. Budget's willing, keep your fingers crossed. But we're very, very thrilled that we did this, and we think Maine people are going to benefit as a direct result of it.
Awesome. So with the last 2 minutes, I just want to kind of perfectly segue from what Martha just said and talk about, like, if you're interested in getting involved in this work, where you can go from here. And I think we have kind of 3 key ways that you can do that. So the first is, like Martha said, we have a rigorous design methodology that underlies all of the work that we do. It's 5-step process, and we only kind of got through our first of 3 of the 5 first steps with Martha and FAME. So if you're interested in supporting this work and seeing what next steps look like in terms of building out these interventions, piloting them in the world, and then testing them, please reach out to us so that we can continue to do this great work with Martha and her team. And then second, as we also discussed, there is broad applicability in this work in the realm of 529, FAFSA, and also just college affordability in general to a bunch of other contexts across the country. So if the things you heard today, behavioral insights or design ideas, resonated with you and your context, consider reading our Improving 529 Plans to Drive Savings design guide for program administrators, or reaching out to us to understand kind of why and how we uncovered our insights and designs in our FAFSA and 529 work more broadly, and see if it would make sense to engage a behavioral science perspective in your work as well. And then third and finally, kind of as we talked about with the broader context of changes in the Department of Education's administration of FAFSA, we recognize that behavioral problems are really not the root of this. There are broad political and structural kind of realities that underlie a lot of these issues. And so in addition to leveraging the power of behavioral science, we also want to leverage our knowledge of systems change and how these 2 things can go hand in hand. So at Ideas 42, we have a policy team that uses all of the great work of this team right here to advocate for broader systems-based change in order to make sure that political and structural changes are working hand in hand with behavioral science to help as many people as possible pursue post-secondary education who want it. So feel free to check out our Policy Lab website, or again, reach out to us if you have any questions in the realm of policy or anything else that we talked about today. So thank you all so much for joining us and staying 1 minute past the hour. And we look forward to following up with some details, materials, and a copy of this recording for everyone who registered. Thank you, everyone.